Following his thin white Duke era of the mid-1970s, David Bowie was ready to put the drug-fueled Los Angeles lifestyle behind him. He took up sanctuary in Berlin in the latter part of 1976, where he'd end up making a trio of albums called the Berlin Trilogy. Even though all three albums were tied to the city where he took up his residence, Heroes was the only one recorded solely in Berlin. Today, we're talking all about David Bowie, the background, the writing, recording and production of one of his biggest songs and what makes it so special. Hello there, it's Warren Hewitt. I hope you're doing marvellously well. Welcome back to another episode of Songs That Changed Music. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and if you hit the notification bell, you'll be notified when we have a new video. Of course, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies. David Bowie is regarded as one of the greatest and most influential musicians and songwriters of the 20th century. His innovative work is highly acclaimed by both critics, fellow musicians, and of course his vast audience. He's one of the best-selling artists of all time. Bowie took an interest in music and art as a child before pursuing a career in music in 1963. Following the flop of his self-titled debut album in 1967, he had his first top 5 single in the UK charts with Space Oddity in 1969. This would be the start of a wildly successful, incredibly innovative career punctuated by theatrics, flamboyance, various personas, and of course, amazing music. We lost David Bowie, one of music's most beloved figures, in 2016, but his legacy remains in an iconic body of work.
It just seems such a romantically, historically interesting place, the Christopher Isherwood thing, and it being the gateway to Europe with all the art forms going in and out of there, and Dada being there. It just seemed like, the Baader-Meinhof and all that. There was something we felt conflict and tension in the air. God, if we can't write in this place, we can't write anywhere, And we're straighten up as well.
Berlin was a creatively charged place in the 1970s when Bowie began living there. He quickly took an interest in the German music scene, which included bands like Tangerine Dream, Kraftwerk, Cluster, Harmonia, and Neu. For a short time, Bowie even lived with Edgar Fruza of Tangerine Dream, who introduced him to the burgeoning German underground scene. The city of Berlin had a massive influence on Bowie and is a major part of how Heroes came to be. David Bowie met renowned musician Brian Eno in 1976. During '75, he had become a fan of Eno's discreet music, a minimalistic album, and the two then began work on the first of 3 albums from the Berlin period. Tony Visconti handled co-production with Bowie, and Low was released in January of 1977. The album is grounded in art rock and experimental rock, and features Bowie's very first explorations of electronic and ambient styles, thanks to Eno's influence.
What happened is that I didn't have the necessary verbal equipment to describe what I was seeing, and that's where I needed assistance. Mm-hmm. I needed somebody to bounce ideas off and somebody to give me input, because I was so confused with all these blessed people running around my head that I had to do that. So, and Eno was somebody that I'd known for years and years and never had the chance to work with.
Brian Eno, formerly of Roxy Music, for any of you people who don't know. I'm sorry.
And formerly of the Portsmouth Symphonia.
Portsmouth Symphonia.
And many lectures.
Many lectures, all that. He's a
professor of fine arts.
Right. And you got involved with him. And he had been making electronic music for,
I wouldn't like to just call it electronic music. He'd been making his own very personal music because he also used organic instruments as well, apart from electronics.
Mm-hmm. Even Heroes, where side 1 is so accessible that it's the finest, I think in our opinion, what you've done up to date as far as bridging that, accessibility towards that, as you would say, personal music,
Yeah, there was a lot of enthusiasm on Heroes because Brian and I liked so much what we did on Low. And we knew we had it in us to do another one, and now I think even a third one.
Again, sharing co-production with Visconti and songwriting with Eno, Bowie began working on Heroes in the summer of 1977. This album incorporated more pop and rock elements than Low, partly due to the King Crimson guitar player, Robert Fripp. Even though the title track was initially unsuccessful as a single, Heroes became one of Bowie's best-known and most acclaimed hits. Now, let's dive into this iconic song, starting with how it was written. A lot of the tracks on this album, including Heroes, were recorded on the spot at Hansa Studios in West Berlin. Bowie wouldn't even write lyrics until he stepped in front of the microphone, after all the other musicians had recorded their parts. The instrumental was finished early in the recording process and remained without vocals until the very end of production. Heroes has a plodding tempo and rhythm that was inspired by the Velvet Underground track, I'm Waiting for the Man.
I'm waiting for my man. $26 in my hand.
The lyrics were inspired by Bowie looking out of a window at Hansa Studios and seeing Visconti embrace his lover in front of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, and this is the window where Bowie wrote Heroes. There were no buildings in the way.
Yeah.
So you could see the wall and this watchtower. So it's this direction around 250 meters.
Do they have? I saw they kept Checkpoint Charlie. It still exists. Do they have any of the watchtowers?
There is one.
There is one.
Yeah, you can have a look at it. There's one, an original from, don't know.
1960, 61.
Yeah, of course, one of the first. I think. Yeah, they kept it, so you can visit.
Especially not really that long ago, is it? No. The song was then written to tell the story of two lovers, one from East Berlin and one from West Berlin. Finally, the title of the song is a nod to the 1975 track called Hero by the krautrock band Neu, of whom both Bowie and Eno were fans. As a whole, Heroes was profoundly influenced by the location of Hansa Studios and the backdrop of West Berlin at the time. Every afternoon, I'd sit down at the desk and see 3 Russian Red Guards looking at us with binoculars, with their Sten guns over their shoulders, and the barbed wire. And I knew there were mines buried in that wall. And that atmosphere was so provocative and so stimulating, and yet so frightening that the band played with so much energy.
Hi everyone, Jamie Humphries here again, and Warren has asked me to talk a little bit about the guitar parts that you can hear on the David Bowie track Heroes. Now Heroes features 2 different guitar players. We have Carlos Alomar on rhythm guitars, and we have King Crimson legend Robert Fripp providing the lead guitar, that ethereal, constant melody that runs throughout the entire track. Now, something to remember when you're looking at this track is that this was recorded in a time where people jammed in the studio and where people went in the studio and played a song from start to finish. And you can really hear how each of these 2 guitar players starts with an initial idea or a theme and then just gradually starts to improvise and bring more into the parts. So today I've chosen to take a look at 3 examples from the track. We're going to take a look at the verse riff, the melody in the chorus, and a little excerpt from what Robert Fripp is playing throughout. So to kick things off, let's take a look at an example of what Robert Fripp is playing. As I said, it's 3 parts, but I've chosen to take an example from the strongest part. I'm going to be using my EBow, although it's said that when he recorded this, they marked points in the studio for him to achieve these constant feedbacking notes. When using an EBow, it's always best to use the neck pickup and also to bring the tone control down so you get that smooth violin-like tone. I'm also using a volume pedal to help me blend the notes in smoothly. Now, like I said, that part is improvised, and there are various other guitar parts kind of interweaving. The main theme is this theme here. There are little variations on this theme. Sometimes you hear him doing something like this. So as I've explained, it is 3 guitar parts, and on occasions you hear these lower notes coming in and they kind of blend into that higher melody, that constant melody. But again, it's pretty free in its improvisation, and it's based around that little melodic figure. To achieve that tone, obviously I'm using the E bow, and as I said, I'm on the neck pickup of my guitar with the tone rolled off, but I'm adding a healthy dose of reverb and delay post. Now let's have a look at the verse riff, which is played by Carlos Alomar, and this is a really cool riff, and this often gets mistaken for a bass riff, but it's obviously a guitar part. It follows the accompanying chords, which are going between the chords of D and G. So let's have a listen to this riff. That's a really cool figure, I think. It's got a great groove to it, and it really helps the momentum of the track. And like I said, it's often mistaken for a bass part. I love the way that it's outlining the chords. So this figure is what's being played over the top of the D major chord. And then against the G major chord, we have this. And then we have this little walking, climbing up figure. So the final part that I want to take a look at is the little melodic theme that we can hear during the chorus section. And this has a couple of different versions of it and variations, and this is double track. So sometimes you hear different things going on depending on what side of the stereo field you're panning. So what I've done here, once again, this is just a generic part. This is a composite, if you like, that gives you a good idea of what's being played. Now, this melody is a really strong hook and a prominent part of the song. And I love the way that it has a slight amount of anticipation with the pre-bends, and there's a little bit of tension and release in there as well. You have these pre-bends. And then again. Changing that final note, targeting that A note when we land on the D chord, and then okay, that's over a different set of chords, A minor to E minor and then D. And then we have this position shift with this little walk up. And there we have a semitone bend. So again, there's that sort of slightly blues influence and that little bit of tension in there. And then we finish off with a whole tone bend. Now, before you all say, no, you played that melody wrong, there is another variation on it. So that is the first time round. Now, the second variation sounds like this. So that time, instead of always landing on that D, we drop down to that C over that A minor. Then we drop down to the B over the E minor. Now in the previous version, we just stayed on that D note over the C. Whether that was intentional, whether that was a mistake, I don't know. But it kind of adds a bit of variation to it, and I think it's really cool that you have these little changes. And we also have a variety of different sort of tail offs at the end of the lick as well. So that. Different endings just depending on how he was feeling, I guess, at the time. As I said, that was all improvised. So hopefully that's just giving you an idea of a few of the key parts. As I said, really, digging into this track, you can really get into the performance, you can really hear the improvisation, and you can really hear how the parts develop and really build as the track progresses.
Heroes was recorded at Berlin's Hansa Studio 2, nicknamed Hansa by the Wall, for its proximity to the structure that divided East and West Berlin. Hansa was a former concert hall used as a ballroom by Gestapo officers during World War II. The hall was eventually converted into a recording studio in 1974. Initially regarded for its incredible acoustics, and now for its rich history of amazing albums that were made there. Visconti took care of most of the recording himself, at the helm of a 24-channel Neve console, frequently bouncing instruments down to free up more tracks on the tape machine. For instance, he captured drums with 8 or 9 microphones and submixed them down to 6 tracks to save precious real estate on the tape. As the arrangement grew, he would do this as many times as needed to fit everything onto 24 tracks. The rhythm section on Heroes consisted of David Bowie on piano, ARP string ensemble synthesizer and percussion, Brian Eno on EMS VCS3 synthesizer, Carlos Alomar on rhythm guitar, George Murray on bass, and Dennis Davis on drums. Bowie, Alomar, Murray and Davis recorded live. Visconti positioned Davis on a riser that sat a few feet higher than the rest of the room. This allowed Murray to hear and feel the kick at ear level without headphones. The bass and guitar amps were goboed off, as was Bowie's grand piano. The drums were left open with an ambience mic placed opposite them at the far end of the room. Visconti used an 87 for that purpose, and for many others, calling it his Swiss Army knife of microphones. In less dense arrangements, he might use 2 ambient mics, but he didn't have that luxury on Heroes. Tony Visconti himself provided background vocals, while Robert Fripp handled the lead guitar. I got a phone call from Brian Eno when I was living in New York in July 1977. He said that he and David were recorded in Berlin and passed me over. David said, "Would you be interested in playing some hairy rock and roll guitar?" I said, "Well, I haven't really played for 3 years, but if you're prepared to take a risk, so will I." Shortly afterwards, a first-class ticket on Lufthansa arrived. Both Visconti and Eno were impressed by Fripp's playing, namely his ability to improvise so effortlessly on material he'd never heard before. Altogether, it took Fripp 3 days to complete his parts on the whole album. Heroes is noted for an unusual, sustained guitar effect heard throughout the whole song. There's some debate on whether Fripp may have used an EBow to achieve the effect, which was introduced a year prior in 1976. According to Visconti, the sound was actually created by Fripp allowing his guitar to feed back, moving around the room to increase or decrease the amount of sustain on each feedback note. Fripp knew the specific distance he needed to be from the amplifier to create that desired effect.
Robert Fripp laid down 3 tracks, not knowing the structure of the song yet, but he had this lovely idea, and was playing with his feedback control by stepping on his measured distances between the note he was playing and where the speaker was. So you have Fripp moving back and forth, playing this part, and you have Eno going like this with the little synthesizer and doing this and all that. So let's just play that. Could you go to that part once more? It's no ordinary guitar sound, and I know you can't buy a pedal like that that'll sound like that. That's done by two very smart people.
Bowie's vocals were recorded after the session musicians had finished their parts and left Berlin. The day they overdubbed vocals, Bowie suggested to Visconti that they take an afternoon break. He hadn't written any lyrics yet and was feeling tense as the time to deliver drew near. That's when Bowie looked out the window at Hansa and saw Visconti with his lover, instantly inspiring the lyrics to the song. By the time Visconti returned, Bowie was finished and ready to record. The entire process from writing lyrics to recording final background vocals was completed in about 5 hours. Visconti captured the performance using an ingenious microphone technique involving 3 microphones. The first microphone was a pretty heavily compressed U47. Mics 2 and 3 were 87s, one about 15 feet away from Bowie and the other one positioned all the way at the other end of the room. Visconti then used gates on mics 2 and 3, which opened up when Bowie really went for it. This let the room sound in and made the vocals sound huge as the intensity of the performance increased. Visconti explains that reverb on his voice is therefore the room itself. None of it is artificial, and it's his voice triggering the gates. What is really great is that the sound of the opening of the 2 verses is really intimate. It doesn't sound like a big room yet. It sounds like somebody just singing about a foot away from your ear. The whole idea worked, and what you hear on the record is probably take 3. We wouldn't go beyond that. He was really worked up by then, and I can tell you he was feeling it.
What's on the other side? Oh, we can be there forever and ever. Then we can be heroes just for one day.
The final mixes for Heroes were completed at Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland, but much of the heavy lifting was already done. Part of Visconti's workflow was bouncing tracks down to free up channels, so he was committing to choices and mixing on the go throughout the recording process. Bowie enjoyed working that way, according to Visconti. Bowie said, "Once I've made up my mind, I don't want to change it." One of the standout features of the mix on Heroes is the seeming lack of kick drum. Visconti shared the thought process behind this decision. You see, the track seemed to plod, and at the mix, I realised that when we played it with the kick drum lower, it had more of an energetic feel to it. Usually the kick drum is to the fore in the mix and equally as loud as the snare. But we discovered that by pulling back the kick drum and emphasising the bass guitar, the song had more of a flow and is a better forward energy, while the shuddering effect, created by Eno's synth, was another tempo element that helped it move along. So this is one of the only tracks I've ever mixed with almost no kick drum in there. And that was entirely intentional because it made all the difference in the world. Heroes debuted as a single on September the 23rd, 1977, before the album's release on October the 14th. Despite a strong promotional push, including Bowie's first appearance on the TV show Top of the Pops since 1973, Heroes failed to soar. It reached only 24 on the UK singles charts and did not even make the US Billboard Hot 100. Writing for NME at the time of release, Charlie Gillett had a particularly negative take, panning the song altogether. The album as a whole, however, garnered much more favourable reviews and is considered by many to be the best of the Berlin Trilogy. Heroes the song may have had a rough start, but it's gone on to become one of David Bowie's most recognisable songs. It routinely makes an all-time list of one of the greatest pieces he ever recorded, which, considering David Bowie's catalogue, is pretty massive. Surely its power and legacy is undeniable. Bowie's performance of Heroes on June the 6th, 1987 in West Berlin was considered a catalyst to the later fall of the Berlin Wall. Of course, the fall of the Berlin Wall on the 9th of November 1989 was a pivotal event in world history. It was the beginning of the end of the Eastern Bloc of the Soviet Union. And upon his death in January 2016, the German government said, "Goodbye, David Bowie. You are now among heroes. Thank you for helping to bring down the wall." Thanks ever so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe and, of course, watch the other videos in the series. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, adio. See you later.